Hello, it's Lindsay with High Altitude Astrology, bringing you another chart reading. And today I'm going to be reading the chart of Nasim Aghdam. She is the woman who went to YouTube and injured 4 people and then killed herself. And she was born on April 4th, 1979 in Iran. We don't have a birthplace, so I used the capital, which is Tehran, and we don't have a birth time. So I'm working off of a solar chart here. But I was very curious as to what was happening in her chart. What does her chart look like? Because it's quite a decision to do what she did. Obviously, there's potentially mental health issues there, but we can get into the chart and look a little bit further and see what we discover. So she's an Aries sun at 13 degrees. And the first thing I noticed is that her sun opposes Pluto natally at 17 degrees of Libra. That alone is a very intense energy. To have an Aries sun, that's the warrior, that's the fighter. Opposite Pluto in Libra, that means you're going to experience the energy of transformation, of intensity, coming into your sphere through your relationships with others. And sometimes that can, ultimately it means you've got to learn how to deal with the Plutonian energy. You've got to learn what transformation is about and how to invite it into your life. Otherwise, you're going to really be at battle with people and in relationships. And I wanted to read something from a website called Exemplar.com, and this talks about Pluto aspects, as specifically the sun opposite Pluto. And they write, one way in which a Pluto-Sun opposition manifests is in the form of problems with and or rebellion against figures of authority. These need to be faced up to and dealt with. It's necessary to be very honest with oneself about every aspect of life. Pluto does not tolerate lies. A further reflection of Pluto opposing the sun is that the person becomes very self-critical and dissatisfied with their achievements. They put a lot of pressure on themselves to get things right. The deepest manifestation of this opposition is when the person is repeatedly forced to confront his or her shadow, i.e., all those aspects of themselves that they hate or find sinister or threatening. Matters concerning sex, violence, and obsessions often come into this struggle. The essential thing is to enter into an understanding with Pluto rather than fight against him. So what this means is that, obviously in this person's life, the Plutonian energy was not necessarily very integrated. And she really did have a struggle going on within herself. And what she was doing was basically saying that, she felt YouTube, the authority of YouTube, was encroaching on her life and her ability to make money, because she had a channel that she said she felt they were somehow limiting people's access to. And that is certainly a possibility, but there was no evidence of that. It was more like just a sort of a baseless claim that she was saying was happening to her. If we look at her Pluto at 17 degrees Libra, we'll also see that by transiting Pluto had been squaring her natal Pluto. And this started in December of 2017, and it would have ended in November of this year, 2018. So she was going through her Pluto square, which is one of the aspects as we approach midlife, actually. Everybody goes through this time of Pluto squaring their Pluto. And it basically was intensifying this struggle within her, this lifelong struggle of, challenges with authority and with, the need to look at herself very deeply and to process what was in her unconscious. So the Pluto square can be a time when we begin to, look more deeply at ourselves. And let me read something from Robert Hand about what the Pluto square transit is all about. He says that it signifies a period of general regeneration, which may not be entirely pleasant. Most of us are attached to the past, whether or not it is good for us, and this transit will root out precisely those elements of the past that are not good for you, even those aspects that you have forgotten about. Problems that you may have lost track of entirely, but which are still working unconsciously in your life, may reappear and become active now, usually but not always to your detriment. Pluto rules forces for change that are inherent within the hidden depths of things. Therefore, you should not blame the unpleasant changes that occur now on circumstances or persons in your environment. Look within yourself to see how the groundwork for the present is laid in the past. So, she was going through a time where her Plutonian energy was being set off. Some other things in her natal chart is, interestingly, a grand trine between Mercury, which is at 26 degrees Pisces, conjunct Mars, which is at 27 degrees Pisces, trining Uranus at 20 degrees Scorpio, and also trining Jupiter at 29 degrees of Cancer. So she had a grand trine operating. And let's break this down. The Mars and the Mercury together, that's somebody who's going to really be a warrior through their communication. They're going to have very strong communication. But in the sign of Pisces, this is about communicating strongly in a compassionate way, in a Piscean way. And she actually was an advocate for animal rights, not using animal products. I believe she was a vegan, not eating animals. And, in her own way, she had this concern for the less fortunate, or the ones that aren't, acknowledged or thought about as much. And then with the Mercury-Mars conjunction trining Jupiter and Cancer and trining Uranus and Scorpio, it's that part of her was like a humanitarian. She wanted to fight for something. And I mean, when you look at some of the images of her, it's interesting because she has a very unique style and, very Uranian. She kind of stands out when she's protesting. She's got this wild costume on, or, just something very different about her. And I attribute that to this Mercury-Mars trining her Uranus and trining her Jupiter. Jupiter wants expansion. Jupiter wants to bring new perspective to oneself and to other people. So, and then the trine to Uranus is about also innovative ways of doing things and bringing insight into the society. So there was this part of her, that was about the rights of others, but more specifically the rights of animals. Was the thing that she was fighting for. So one other thing about her natal chart is that she did have that Mars-Mercury conjunction in Pisces squaring her Neptune at 20 degrees Sagittarius. So Mars, natal Mercury squared Neptune. This is somebody who perhaps at times doesn't always see things clearly. Mercury is our thought process. Mercury is our communication. But Neptune can bring quite an imagination to and creativity to our thought process. But in the square, it can also bring perhaps times where we don't understand things correctly, or we imagine things to be a certain way when they're not. And I wanted to read something about natal Mercury square Neptune from astromatrix.org. And they say that this aspect indicates a difficulty with an overactive imagination interfering with rational and logical thought process. This can result in self-deception and the construction of a private version of truth and reality. So this speaks a bit to perhaps what she thought was happening with herself and her YouTube channel and YouTube itself. You know, perhaps she believed that, you know, something was happening around her channel that wasn't necessarily the case. And to me, this Mercury squaring her Neptune is one indication of how that's possible. And finally, with her Venus is at 7 degrees Pisces, and it is opposed Saturn at 8 degrees of Virgo. And of course, Saturn in Virgo, her YouTube channel had an element of health involved in it. She was somewhat of, well, her video content was about health at times, and she referred to herself as like a bodybuilder. So that's interesting with the Saturn opposite Venus and the Saturn being in Virgo, the sign of health and fitness. Actually, as I'm looking at that, I'm sensing there's something with her Venus opposite Saturn that brings in this element of, you know, not knowing our self-worth, because Venus is about our worth, but Saturn at times can feel like, you know, it limits us from experiencing our self-worth. And so if that were the case, you know, with Saturn and Virgo, it would mean that she would really try to work really hard at her health in order to try to kind of wrestle with some of these perhaps self-worth issues. Of course, Venus and Pisces, you know, that's somebody who might be attracted to the more kind of glamorous aspects of life, and, you know, maybe desiring to be a YouTube sensation or a YouTube star. But that, you know, Saturn opposite the Venus can mean that at times not really, you know, feeling like we know that sense of worth within ourselves. So perhaps seeking it through some sort of attention or attraction to wanting to other people to notice her and to see her. So Saturn and Mars by transit in Capricorn, we're trining that natal Saturn really from the beginning of March, and it would have been through December of this year. And you would think with Saturn and Mars, you know, there's a lot of energy, a lot of ability to really make things happen with that combination, trining her natal Saturn, her ability to create foundation and to work hard. You would think that might bring in a time where things are a little more stable in regards to work. But what it was doing was setting off her natal Venus opposite Saturn. And Venus is also about our money, as well as those issues of self-worth that I was talking about with the opposition from the Saturn as well. And so instead of it necessarily being a time of stability, what perhaps was happening was that it was setting off that Venus-Saturn opposition in the natal chart and just bringing up this issue of lack of self-worth or not feeling our value, you know, and so there needed to be somebody to blame that on. And I've also read with natal Venus opposite Saturn that sometimes it can be, you know, the source of these feelings can be related to our personal authority figures in our life, like the father or whoever was kind of in charge growing up. So, there was something being set off at this time that wasn't as conscious as it could have been, but it had something to do with this issue of value and self-worth. Okay, so what was happening also by transit is that transiting Mercury stationed retrograde right opposite her Pluto. So it's stationed retrograde at 16 degrees on March 22nd. And her Pluto again is at 17 degrees of Libra. So that Mercury retrograde in Aries opposite her Pluto happened, and it was really setting her off mentally. It was really bringing up her frustration and her anger. And Mercury in Aries, it's about that warrior energy being brought to our thoughts and to our thinking and to our communication. And remember, her natal sun is opposed her natal Pluto, so it was setting off that opposition as well in her chart, between the sun and Pluto natally. So she just became very frustrated and very angry at this time. And it was part of the Mercury retrograde energy that was adding to this intensity that she was beginning to experience. And the last thing I want to mention is that her solar arc Uranus had been hanging around by square to her natal Mercury-Mars conjunction. And that to me means it could have been attributing to her erratic thinking, to her way of processing thoughts. Uranus can have this very, very shocking, very unpredictable way about it at times, especially with the square to our Mars and our Mercury, our thinking and our desire to take action. I don't know. I haven't heard anything if there were any kind of mental issues going on here for her, if she had been diagnosed with anything. But, with the Mars conjunct Mercury natally squared the Neptune, that could just, that could mean somebody who does have a very active imagination and perhaps, something going on with the mental process. And with the solar arc Uranus squaring that Mars Mercury conjunction at this time, perhaps there was some undiagnosed mental disorder that hadn't been addressed, or perhaps there was something going on that had been addressed, and that if there were drugs being taken to address a mental disorder, perhaps that played some role in this decision that she made. I wanted to end this reading by sharing a short understanding of my view of astrology, because I think it's important to recognize that you can find astrological patterns in charts, but they won't always manifest the same way in everybody's chart. We have to take into consideration people's environment that they're raised in. We have to take into consideration their own level of awareness of themselves. So I think it's important to recognize that not everybody with a sun opposite Pluto is going to have this kind of outcome in their life per se. And astrology is great for suggesting personal understanding, but only we really know how energies are manifesting in our lives. And that's what's interesting about astrology. It's there's symbols that invite a conversation, but they're not necessarily definitive ideas about exactly what somebody is going to be or is going to be like. So we just need to recognize that about astrology. So that's my interpretation of Nassim Aghdam. I just felt the need to look at the chart because of the extraordinary circumstances that happened in this instance, and was curious as to what it was that her chart looked like. So thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you do enjoy my channel. And I also offer readings. You can reach me at info@highaltitudeastrology.com. Thanks so much. Adios.